and I'm not echoing anymore. Fantastic. Just get started. Antonio Cabrales, who is here from Madrid, will be chairing the session. I just wanted to start to say we're doing something a little bit different. If you've been to these sessions before, we're starting something a little bit different this time. So the session itself will be about an hour as normal, but after that, we'll have about 15-20 minutes of breakout rooms in case you want to connect with people and chat to people. This time, because the session is on conference submissions, there'll be a breakout room for people who are considering submitting for conferences in 2024. And then there'll be a breakout room just to sort of connect. So if there's something you're working on, you want to connect with other people, recognize someone you haven't seen for a while, I want to touch base with them, any of that, just sort of wait for the breakout rooms and just connect there. They're free form. Feel free to dip in and dip out. And then, of course, we have the next upcoming sessions. Do keep an eye out for that and for our own conference as well. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Professor Antonio Cabrales, who is an ex-colleague of mine at UCL, a very cherished colleague who has sadly now moved on to lovely sunny Madrid. And he is also a CTEL associate. Over to you, Antonio.
All right, thank you very much, Parama, and welcome everyone to this session on how to submit papers to an economics education conference. We have four really great speakers that we're privileged to have around. So it will be Tisha Emerson, who's professor of economics at East Carolina University and head of department. I don't know how you do it, but good luck with that. She works on a bunch of issues, economic education, sorry, but also environmental economics, business ethics, about international trade. Simon Halliday, who is also a professor of economics at Bristol University, and he works on behavioral experimental economics with a focus on social preferences, and then various applied economics topics, and with a data science angle, which is nice. So Claudia Jenkins, who's also professor of economics, but this time at Imperial College London, former colleague of both Parama and I. We all miss one another very much. And she's done lots of work in especially competition policy, and in addition to economic education. And finally, Dina Petropoulou, who is a professor at LSE and deputy HOD education. And she's her interests are, scientific interests are international trade, IO, political economy. So we have a variety of interest in here, in addition to economic education. That's going to give richness to the discussion, because everyone comes from different angles, is taught different things and has various interests. You didn't come here to listen to me, so I will shut up, and I will give people the word in the alphabetical order in which I discuss them, and so that means Tisha's first. Let's try to get this short so that we can then discuss. Thanks, Tisha.
Okay, can everyone see my PowerPoint? Okay, great.
Yes, yes, we can.
So thank you, Antonio. In addition to being department chair, I am the incoming chair for the American Economic Association's Committee on Econ Ed, and I have not yet figured out how I'm going to do all of it, but it's all going to work out somehow. So I'm really excited today to talk to you about the conference that the AEA's Committee on Econ Ed does host. We started it way back when I was first on the committee. Mike Watts had been to the D conference in the UK, and he came back and he said, he was the chair of the AEA CEE at the time, and he said, I have an idea, we should have our own conference, and who wants to help? And Sam Allgood, Kimmery McGoldrick, and I raised our hands and said, we would love to help you, Mike. And then C-Tree was born that next year. So I'm very excited about the conference, and I think it's doing really, it's doing really well. It's grown a lot from the beginning and continues to do well. So I hope, let's see. It is an annual conference, so we are usually together late May, early June. It's sort of like that last week, the week which might not mean anything to you, but in the States, it starts with Memorial Day. So that week is usually the week where we have the conference. And in 2024, that is going to be May 29th through the 31st. And our location moves around because we like to feature different parts of the U.S. and we have some local people who join us at the different places. So we sort of do Eastern U.S., sort of more central, and then Western. This year, earlier, we were in Portland, Oregon. The year before that, we were in Central, we were in Chicago, and this coming year, we'll be in Atlanta, Georgia. So hopefully there are some really good direct flights for y'all to come and join us in Atlanta. Often, not in the beginning, it was every year, but we've gone to mostly every other year. We will be at what we call a Fed city, so a city where the Federal Reserve Bank has a branch, and that is going to be the case in Atlanta, and we will have an event that is hosted by the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. Our call for submissions always opens in early September. This year we were a little delayed because we were making some adjustments to the portal, but usually September 1 that's the goal for when we open the submission portal, and then the deadline for submissions is always December 1st. And that is what it is this year. So you still have time to get your submissions in, almost a whole month. So please be thinking of submitting something if you haven't already. We have multiple types of submissions. There is, sort of the traditional individual paper. So if you have either a pedagogy or research paper related to economic education, please consider submitting it. Also, sometimes people submit complete sessions, and these are going to be a set of 3 to 4 papers that are on a single topic or related topic. They're fairly closely related. Last year, after a number of suggestions, we piloted a poster session, and it went really well. So we have added that as a consistent part of our conference going forward. So we do have submission portal for the poster sessions. There's also panels, and a panel will usually have 3 to 5 speakers that will talk about a particular topic. One example, and you could look at past C-TREE programs, but one example might be a set of representatives from funders who fund economic education research. So for example, maybe someone from NSF, the Kazakian Foundation, and there might be others. That's actually a panel I'm hoping that will be put together for this coming year. But also, other panels have been provided in the past. There's also a workshop, and you might think, well, what's the difference between a panel and a workshop? A workshop is going to be more interactive. And so there will probably be just one, at most maybe 2 speakers, but they'll be instructing the participants in that session on how to do something related to EconEd. So we have often had representatives from the St. Louis Fed talk about how you could use FRED in your macro classes, for example, or you might have someone showing how we could use particular Excel applications in your economics classes. So those will give you some ideas of what we've had. We also realize that there are some people who might be a little bit newer to EconEd, or you might just not have anything to present at this time. And so we also have in the portal an option for people to volunteer to be a session chair or a discussant. And we really appreciate all the volunteers. We, in the recent years, have averaged about 20 people volunteering for these types of roles. And so that allows us to bring more people into the program. And I think it makes for a richer experience for everybody. If you go to the submission portal, and I'll have a link to it in a bit, you'll see basically about a paragraph description for each of these types of submissions. So once December 1st passes, we download all the submissions, and we have a 3-member C-TREE program committee, and they rate or score all of the submissions on a 4-point scale. And then the scores are averaged for each of the submissions within a submission type where they're ranked. And we identify, basically a cutoff. We have limited space on the program. So we have about 5 concurrent sessions across the 3-day conference, and we have about 5 concurrent sessions in any one time period. So that, again, that's a limited number that we can have on the program. So we do this ranking, and part of the cutoff is to make sure that we don't exceed our space limit, but then we also want to make sure that we have good quality. So last year we had record submissions, which is great news. Like, that's fabulous. But that also meant that the cutoff was a little bit higher than in the past. But I think there's still, many opportunities to participate in the program. So that all is happening in December and January, and then all submitters are notified in early February regarding the decision of their submissions. And then usually around February 15th, we have our registration portal open and the program is available. So, as promised, I have a link to the portal. You can scan that QR code and go directly to the portal, and you'll again see all those descriptions, and then link to whichever submission you might like to. You could submit multiple things, but we usually ask that people not submit more than maybe 3, because it just ultimately becomes a bit of a scheduling problem to have any one person in more than 2 or 3 sessions. So maybe I'll just leave that on there for just another second in case anyone else wants to scan it. And I will also say that we have a mailing list, and I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, and then I'll be done. We invite everyone to join the mailing list. And one of the things that you would be notified about is the opening of the portal every year for submissions. Okay, so if you would like to join our mailing list, you would send your name, title, affiliation, and email address to the email on screen, and they will get you signed up. Not only will you get notifications about C-Tree, but some of the other events that the AEA-CEE puts on. And one of the things that we have started just this year is a newsletter, which comes out twice a year. And so you will be notified when new issues of the newsletter comes out. So I hope that you will join us, and either for the conference this year, on the mailing list, or in one of the other ways that we have available through the CEE. Thank you.
Thanks, Tisha. I think since we're going to have discussion at the end, we might just give the word to Simon directly, and then we see. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Awesome. So yes, I'm just going to be mentioning how to our suggestions on how to submit to the Southern Economic Association Conference. So the Southern Economic Association Conference is one of the biggest conferences in economics. And for some years previously, Tisha, Gail, and Kim Marie organized the presidential sessions on economics education. Then a while back, they asked Emily Marshall and I to take over that organization, given that they are more involved with the CEE and other commitments. And so Emily and I have been doing that for a couple of years now. I think this is the 3rd year that we've been doing it. And we are basically organizing for the Southern Economic Association, which happens every year in November, just before, in the States, Thanksgiving. I'll mention where we're going to be, but you'll see that we're in New Orleans this coming year. My slides, I've just put a Dropbox link into the chat. So before I mention some of this stuff, I thought it's also worth mentioning how, especially for folks who are on the teaching track at various places, it's quite important to get embedded in the economics education kind of community, because typically it's going to result in you making networks, being able to become a discussant, maybe produce a paper, and find co-authors for future collaborations, which, as you're trying to get up the rungs on that teaching track, is going to become more and more important, because that's typically going to be a part of the kind of requirements that you need for promotion. So I just recommend that as a way to think about this, and sort of suggest that as a motivation here. Okay, so now In terms of how we're organized, we basically have a mailing list of folks that we send out an email to quite far in advance of the conference, in March. And then we will ask folks to submit, and they will we're going to send them a link to a Google Sheet. So it's not as advanced as a portal hosted for the Committee on Economic Education for C-Tree, but it's a Google Sheet, and you're going to a Google questionnaire, and you're going to basically give us your name and a variety of other information, which I'm going to highlight here. Like Tisha mentioned, we ask what roles you're interested in, and you can select one or many. But also I'm going to highlight here, if you only want to be a discussant or a session chair, that's an option. And so I'm going to highlight why that's important later. We've got a variety of different roles that you can have. You can be submitting a paper, you can be submitting a panel, and a variety of other things. We want your paper title. We want a full abstract, and we also want a short abstract. So the full abstract has much more detail on it, and is indicating for us the stage of completion of the paper. And I'm going to comment on that in a little bit more detail in a second. We're also going to ask you about which of the following categories best fits your paper. I'll explain some greater detail about these in a second, but the Journal of Economic Education has these different categories for different papers. And so the main three that we're going to have here are research in economic education, economic content, or economic instruction. Now, the reason this is important is because we try to put different papers into a kind of coherent session. So if there are 4 papers on research and economic education, we want to have all those in one session. Papers on economic content, we want to have another session. Papers on economic instruction, we want to have in their own session as well. We also ask you to provide the primary JEL code, and then to submit for us some sense of how advanced your draft is. So it could be work in progress, preliminary draft, or an advanced draft, or that the project might not even be started yet. So we've had folks who haven't quite started yet by the time it's kind of February, March when they're initially submitting, but they know it's going to be completed by the time they get to us in November. So we're trying to be quite forgiving there in terms of what you think, what stage you're at currently, but it's still the case that we want you to convince us in your abstract that you're going to have something by the time November hits, because you do still actually have to give your paper to the discussant when you're going to present it at the Southern Economic Association. We also ask some questions about data and any other information that you'd like us to know. So in terms of the categories, these are the categories at the Journal of Economic Education. So we highlight the first 3, like I mentioned: research and econ ed, econ content, and economic instruction. The journal also has online and features information. I'm not highlighting those, but you can see information about those at the journal if you're so interested. You can also just go and check these once more in my slides if you are interested. Now, just in terms of some pointers, I often act as a reviewer for the Journal of Economic Education, the International Review of Economic Education, the Southern Economic Journal, or American Economist, a variety of papers where folks are writing stuff about economics education. And so pointers that I'd like to give people are that it's really important that you point out what problem your paper solves, what the gap in the literature is that you're addressing, and also showing that you know the literature. So a number of times I've read a paper, but it's not really clear that they've engaged much with the literature before they submit the paper to JEE or IRE. Similarly, if you've got something in your long abstract, show to us that you know something about the literature with which you're going to be engaging. It's good for you to explain the specifics about your class and also the institutional setting. So especially as we're trying to expand and make this more and more international, you'll have conversations with folks in, say, the United States or the UK, where things are very, very different institutionally. And it's really important to be specific about what those institutional differences. And then finally, to provide evidence from surveys, from student feedback or comments, at least something that gives us some sense of the success of your intervention or the kinds of responses that it's gotten from students. Now, what are we looking for? So Emily and I tend to take more risks with accepting papers for the Southern Economic Association. We want to be open and inclusive. We want to bring people into the economics education fold. And also, if we don't know you, you're new to the community, we do our best to include you. Now, as a consequence of that, we also, if people submit multiple papers, like Tisha was saying, it's probably going to be the case that if we can include some new people, at the cost of excluding someone who's been more embedded in the community or submitted multiple papers, it's probably for your second or third paper, we might not include that if we know you well, but for someone new, we really want to include them if it's their first time coming to the conference, and then also bring them along, we hope, to C-Tree. I just want to highlight some guides on submitting to the Journal of Economic Education, different sections. If you don't know these, I recommend taking a look at them if you're considering submitting to the Southern Economic Association or to IRE or to JEE. And then finally, we're also the discussants of last resort. So I think one year I was a discussant on 3 or 4 papers. And I just mentioned this because we have those categories at the start of whether you want to be a discussant or a session chair. Typically we can get our session chairs, but sometimes it's tough to get discussants. So if you would like to come and participate for the first time, but you're not sure if you have a paper, we would love to have you as a discussant and to get to know you, have a coffee, chat more about economics education. And like I said, it's in a fun place this year. It's in New Orleans. I don't know what the 2024 location is going to be yet, but we've been in a variety of fun places, which is often nice to visit, where it's often warmer than where I've been in the northeast of the US or Bristol in the UK. I also want to give you some sense, although we don't have a bunch of parallel sessions, we have 8 sessions this year at the conference. Basically, the whole of the 18th and the 19th, we have populated sessions on economics education at the conference. And so if you're coming, you can participate in these sessions, maybe go and also participate in something in your field if you want to. But it would be really great to see you there and in the future. We look forward to getting your submissions.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So again, as before, we go directly to Clodagh and see what you want to say.
Thanks, Antonio. So in order not to take too much time, I went for the no slides option. So I'm here to talk about CETAIL's Teaching Conference, which we run with Doug McGee in Cornell University. So our conference is a bit different to the others that have been talked about because it's free and it's online. So you can join us from anywhere in the world. We run it at the end of June. So there's a 3-day in-person Zoom conference at the end of June. And the week before that, we run what we call online poster sessions. So YouTube videos. So we run them as YouTube premieres. Our call for papers for next year is coming out next week. And if you haven't seen it before, I guess our conference is very much about education practice. So understanding things that people have tried in the classroom or with student support or with assessment. And we're as much interested in what works as what doesn't work. So if you've tried something and it hasn't worked, we're really interested in seeing people reflecting on that as much as what has worked and what's gone well. I think like the others have mentioned, we do look for things that look like they will be interesting to the community come the end of June and that look like they are done. So if you are claiming you're doing an empirical project, for example, by the new year, we would expect you to already know what your data is and your methodology, even if you haven't done the research yet. If you want to talk about something that you've done in practice, you've probably already done it to think that you have a paper on it. So even if it's not sort of a journal ready paper, it does need to be something that we feel like you can present on. Our presentations are also very quick. So you get 10 minutes and we have a small number of sessions. So I think like with SEA, we don't have parallel sessions. What you do when you apply is you let us know what your project's about, why you think it's of interest to the community, and we will decide if we think it will work best as a poster or as part of the live presentation. So you don't tick what you want to do. There are loads of examples now available online because we record all our conferences. So you can go back and see what other people have done, particularly on YouTube, looking at the past poster paper. They've been really successful. And I think like Simon was mentioning for SEA, we also look for themes. So sometimes we're selecting from papers where we're looking for things that work well together that we think are the current issues. We're fairly new in the world of education conferences, so we started in 2020, but every year we're getting more and more applications. We're also now, in the form that you fill in, have the option of offering to be a chair. We don't have discussants, just to keep the ball rolling. But what we also have is, because we're online, we're able to have Zoom breakout rooms, a bit like we're doing today after this seminar, which are kind of our attempt to do a mixer where people can meet and talk about wider issues. So keep an eye out for our call for papers next week. If you have any questions, you can always get in touch with the CTEL email, or obviously ask them today, and we will answer what we can. And I'm going to give a bit more time to the others.
Great, Claudia. Thanks a lot. So now it's Dimitra. Thanks very much, Dimitra.
Great, thank you. Let me just get things ready because it's that clear? Everyone can see that?
Yep.
Yep,
Can you see it
great.
well?
Great. So thanks very much for inviting me. I'm here as the lead on the conferences and symposia group of the Economics Network. And one of the big jobs of that group is to organize the developments in economics education, the D conference. This took place just a couple of months ago at Heriot-Watt University. Here we are with Gail, our keynote speaker, Gail Hoyt, who talked about the joy in economics teaching, and this is us being very joyful with supply and demand. But to give you a little bit of information about the conference itself, it is a biennial conference, so obviously every 2 years. It's in different locations every time, and always in the UK, and often also going across the UK, sometimes in London, sometimes in Scotland. I'm not quite sure where it's going to be in 2025. Since it's biennial, we sort of spend the year after the conference thinking about the next one. As I said, the conference takes place usually in the first week of September, and the call is in December of the previous year. So you can expect an email in early December around about the next conference. The submission deadline, which is either paper abstracts, pretty short abstracts, or proposals for workshops or panels. The deadline is end of March. Then decisions come in around the end of May. Then once you're on the program, there's a deadline for an extended abstract. This is to sort of incentivize people to actually do the research, because often you get submissions that are quite early stage. And then the conference itself. I suppose what's special is that we have a special issue in IRE for papers that are at the conference, and therefore there's like a deadline at the end of September for submitting that paper, which gives some time for people to make some adjustments based on feedback they receive at the conference. So it works quite well. So there are 3 types of submissions. The majority of presentations are papers, and these are half-hour slots with approximately 20 minutes presenting, and then questions from the audience. We do not have discussants in this conference, so it's a different style. There are workshops. I'll say a little bit about them. The difference between a paper and a workshop is that a workshop is intended to be an interactive experience where you showcase something on the spot with an audience, or get people to think about an issue, and that you're engaging the audience, and that is the whole experience. Whereas a paper is more about presenting your findings, or presenting a novel teaching method or something like this. This year, for the first time, we also had a handful of panels. This is more taking a topical issue and getting different perspectives on it. So, for example, it could be different perspectives on the use of AI or something. Those are very few. So a little bit about how submission happens, and then I want to focus on what makes a good proposal. So we assign 2 reviewers. We anonymize the abstracts or proposals. We assign 2 reviewers who are anonymous also to each other, and the task is to assign a score on a 4-point scale. There's very little guidance beyond this, so people are sort of using their own sort of subjective guidance on what they think is a very good proposal versus not. It's not too regimented, but they do provide, the reviewers do provide brief comments on why they gave the score. Just a few lines saying these are the strengths and weaknesses, hence, I don't know, a 3.5 or something. We then average those, and that identifies a cutoff. And then depending on the slots we have in the particular program and the distribution of scores in that year, you populate the program. But like others have said, we do want to have a balance across institutions. We do want to meet newcomers. And sometimes also we have a third reviewer if there are any borderline cases or gap or big differences between the scores or something like this. It's usually quite straightforward. There seems to be sort of a natural break sometimes around 2.75 or 3. The acceptance rate is around 45 to 55%. And this sort of tells you the number of papers we had in the last 2 conferences. And around 90 to 100 attendees at this conference. Just to give you a flavor of who those attendees are, I just thought one graph to show you. I would say 3/4 approximately are education-focused economists in universities. It's quite UK-based, but there were also a number of international attendees this time around. There are also people who are on the traditional, teaching and research track. But given the nature of the conference, it is going to be people that do have an intellectual or professional focus on education. So when I was invited to this talk, I thought, why don't we actually analyze the information we've got? And we had 127 paper abstracts, just focusing on the papers over 2 conferences. And we had 2 reviewer scores and some brief comments. The mean score was 2.76 over the entire pooled sample, and the mean absolute difference was approximately 1. But I should say it's often far less than 1, with just a few outliers of like extremes, right? So what I did is I hired a lovely MSc student. She just finished her MSc. She's now applying for PhDs to help me with this. And we worked to look at the anonymized reviewer comments and abstracts using NVivo to try and understand what determined a high score. Okay, what did reviewers value? And the emerging dimensions that really echo what the other speakers have said is trying to identify very clearly what is the gap in the literature, what is the interesting pedagogical question that the paper is trying to address. Is it something around? Is it a new method? Is it a new way of delivering content? Is it a new way of assessing? What is it that's new? Clearly defined objectives for the paper. Another dimension would be some detail around either the institutional context. Usually data is collected within the actual course being delivered. What are the methods being used to analyze that data? And ideally, some concrete results, either that are found or anticipate to be found. We hope to find the answer to this question. And ideally, another dimension that came up, this was really looking at the comments of the reviewers, right? The people judging. So we boiled it down to 5 dimensions. And then what we did is we looked at each individual abstract. We didn't look at the original reviewer scores at all. We just looked at the actual verbal information, the qualitative information. We gave scores in each of these dimensions, -1, neutral, or strong. This is the distribution of the actual scores given by reviewers over the 2 conferences. And the ones that got in were 2.75 and above. Those are the ones that actually ended up on the program, with some iteration around the edges for the reasons discussed. And I guess this is my headline figure. This is what we found. If you think of 2.7 above 2.75 as your cutoff, it seems that having a clear research question, clear research objectives, and some results is essential. If you don't have that, it's very unlikely you're going to be on the program, because it's not very clear to the reviewer what the audience will get out of what you're presenting. It's not concrete enough. At the same time, because of the limitations that we face in doing pedagogical research, there are a lot of institutional constraints around what you can do. Can you run experiments on your students, for example? Because of those constraints, sometimes, we're not necessarily finding causal evidence of a particular method with a particular outcome. If there is something special, around the methods, if it's sort of, well-founded methodologically, it gets a big boost from the reviewers. So if you look at the top ones at the top, it's data and methods that's driving it. If you look at what's causing people to be at the top to lose scores, it's lack of originality, or a sense that the value added to the wider community isn't very strong. So they might say, this looks great, but feels very specific to this university. So an effort to try and broaden it out to what could a broader audience get out of these results? It's very possible that the papers would have that, but it wasn't spelled out in the abstract. So trying to show how a general audience attending a conference would benefit from knowing what you found seemed to really add a lot. So, and if we do that across, within the two conferences, the picture is really the same. So I would say the essentials are clear, well-defined research question. The other thing is thinking about, if you're presenting a new method, how are you evaluating that method? Is there a way to do it in a way that's more watertight? And maybe you are doing it, but explain your method if possible. And the other is try and think about impact. And the reason for that is because what we survey our conference participants, and I would say the most important question is, how would you rate the impact the conference had on you? And Dee does super well on that. It's a really high score. A lot of people feel that they're learning things they can apply in their work. So that dimension, even if it's sort of not great data, the sample size is relatively small. It's definitely not a randomized trial. It's just, an indicator. Showing breadth of application could also add value. And I guess the last thing I want to say is about workshops. The sample size of those is really too small to analyze in any systematic way. But I guess from the perspective of choosing these, I always am left feeling that the proposals are not detailed enough, and we need to fill the time the program, but we worry, is this what we hope a workshop would be? A workshop is interactive. You're relying on the audience actually doing something in that time. So you're going to have 45 minutes to do something with your audience. What exactly will your audience do, and for what purpose? It's more about identifying a need, not for something to be explained to someone, but for them to actually do it in action in the moment. So if you think about your workshop in that way, it might be a little more convincing and more successful. And that's it, really. This is a QR code. If you wanted to find out more about the conference we've just had, have a look at the presentations. All the abstracts, all the extended abstracts and slides are available, by the way, if you want to have a look at what people are presenting in the conference. You can see them all. They're public information. Okay, that's it for me.
All right, great, Dimitra. I think if I remember correctly, we now have some time for general discussion, and then we go into the breakout rooms, right? Okay, so using my privilege as the moderator, I will ask a few burning questions I have, and then I think we'll go through a couple of questions there in the chat, and then we give the mic to anyone who wants to talk. So these questions that I have are really for everyone in the panel, so feel free to jump and tell me. So I had prepared some questions beforehand, but you've basically answered most of them, so I will ask some new ones. So the new ones that were spared, so the first one is spared by something Tisha said, but I think it's really for all of you. So Tisha said there's been an increase in submissions recently. And I was wondering, so that's the first one. I'll ask all of them at the same time, and then you answer at whichever one you wanted. So the first one is, does this mean you think there is an increased interest in education, so that we can persuade our colleagues that really interest of education methods, pedagogy, and so on is on the rise, and we should try to persuade some of our colleagues in the department that it's actually fine to do research on education, economic education? That's one. The second one is, several of you have talked about discussants and also chairing. Now, chairing is a bit more, in a sense, surprising to me, because most of the times the chair doesn't do much in a normal conference. You're just there and make sure that the 20 minutes that you have are really not, people don't overgo over that time. So is there something else that you would expect in this kind of conference with respect to a chair? And final one is something you haven't really answered, which is you have gone to some extent thinking what is it that makes a paper go, but will you accept a paper in which is like sort of like almost a pre-analysis plan? Like I said, this is what I'm going to do. There's a register report where this is what I'm going to do, but I haven't done it yet. That might help you out to make your design cleaner. If you have some idea of a research, but you're not entirely sure this is going to work and you prefer to get a bit of feedback on that. So those are my 3 questions. So please answer whoever wants, and then we go into the chat questions. Thanks.
Well, I'll jump in since your first question was inspired by something I said. I don't know that we have enough data for C-Tree to say that it's a trend per se. I will say that we were, there was increasing interest in participation until COVID, and then that, of course, disrupted everything. But the first time we were back in person was in 22, so last year, and our submissions were a little bit down. I think that was still because there was some uncertainty until closer to the conference, whether you're going to be virtual or online and things like that. But we had the highest submissions ever. So we had 107 papers submitted, like individual papers in 2023. And so ultimately we were only able to accept about 56% of those. But we added this poster session, which allowed us to have 14 people presenting their work. That there were 20 submissions for poster, so we had about a 70% acceptance there. So, and we like to keep having some panels and workshops. So that, of course, takes some of the space. My hope is that it is the start of a trend in an upward direction. And it does seem to me when I'm talking to people that there's a lot more interest. And of course, I would like to see more support for this by our institutions and things like that. I'm not really sure where this is going to go, though. So I'll just leave it at that. And maybe I'll have more data in a year or two.
Just to jump in there, like in terms of more interest, like we for sure had growing interest, it seems, at the Southerns. And basically, we've just asked for more slots. And they haven't yet said no when we've asked for more slots. And so I don't know if the day is going to come when they're just going to say, look, no, we're not going to run parallel education sessions. You need to cut more sessions. So we'll see what happens there. But we accept, I'd say, a majority of the papers that are submitted, at least we have. And we've tried to be, like, as I said, inclusive and like bringing people on board as much as we possibly can. And if we can fit folks in, we will do our best to do so. Yeah. But but one answer to your question, my suspicion is that it's actually got more to do with the increase in the prevalence of teaching track professor positions and the fact that folks need this work in order to be promoted to the level of like professor. And so that's also an important facet for me, not just our colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just on from TEAching conference perspective, we have seen more as well, and I think sort of linked to Simon's point, one of the reasons why we organized this seminar was, there's kind of people who are professional at writing these who've been around for quite a while. And what we found was some of the newer people coming in maybe weren't writing as good proposals because they weren't quite sure what was needed in an EconTEAching type proposal. So hopefully this session will help, but that would be, my sense is that scholarship is important, increasingly important, certainly in the UK, but also in other places for people's professional practice. And it is similar but different to economics research conference proposals. And in particular, Antonio, your question about, so we do accept things that are, I'm thinking about doing this, or I'm about to start doing this in my module, but I haven't analyzed it yet type proposals, with the caveat that we do want to make sure that they're doable. So if somebody's saying they're going to do like 20 months of work research in 3 months, we can see that. But if it looks like something that we think you can do in the timescales, then we would accept that kind of proposal.
All right, thanks.
Can I just add just something real quick? I want to say that there seems to be two different types of proposals, and in the beginning we sort of had a mix in the States, what we would refer to it as pedagogy. So this is an innovation I'm doing in my class, and this is how it went, but not with a lot of data and research to support it, but really just more what we would call a pedagogy piece versus research, where you're doing maybe an efficacy study. And when we started C-Tree, it was about 50-50 in terms of the types of submissions. And we've seen it really go towards pedagogy, and that's actually a concern for us. So we really would like to see more what we would call research and not just pedagogy pieces submitted to C-Tree. And we would like to, so we were happy that we had this, record level of submissions, but we were also very sad because that meant we couldn't include as many people as we would like. So on the margin, I think what we want to do is not accept a second or third paper from someone who's already on the program when we have these constraints, but to add somebody new if we can.
Right, thanks. And with respect to chairing, so it's normal chairing, or is more, there's more needed in a conference like yours?
I would say the sessions get quite chatty, and so and what I mean by that is like at least in the ones that I've been to, like folks, they're often someone like basically addressing questions and saying who the questions are being addressed to among the speakers, or if other people are participating as well. So especially at the end of a session, I know it's been the case that we often end up having more questions than can be addressed by the session participants. And so it's basically just having someone who could administer that, and also who is shameless about enforcing the time limits.
Yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
so yeah, this is what I was looking for. So these are not universal skills, so you need to have something to be there. Okay, thanks.
So in many conferences, the last speaker is the chair because they have an incentive not to be squeezed, right? But I think indeed that it's sort of quite nice to have, because the sessions are by theme, there could be some unifying thread. And in some of the ones I saw this year, chair started by saying, we have 3 presentations on this theme. The first one does this, the second one, trying to make it more a discussion a little bit, but some do it, some don't.
And I think by being online with Teaching Conference, you have the extra chat, but when it's going on in the chat on Zoom, simultaneous to people presenting as a chair, there's a whole thing about not paying attention to the chat. And we do have a chair and a chat chair to help with that. But yeah, the discussion, I think the conference, when we organize programs, we have to allow more time for the chat and the discussion, but also the timekeeping is really key.
And I would say for C-Tree, we're really trying to be inclusive. So if it helps you to be on the program and there's no other way that you are able or feel comfortable, then chairing a session is a way for you to be on the program if that's helpful.
All right, great. Okay, so let's go to the questions that we have here. There's one that didn't show up for everyone because that was direct to me. And from Susan McCarthy, it's a question for all the panelists. Do any of these conferences support ED Talks? That means short 5 to 10 minutes presentations on a specific class activity, etc.
So I think maybe I can start. So with Teaching Conference, that kind of thing, what might often end up being one of our YouTube premiere videos. So something that's quite concrete and what we think of as sort of how to. So here's an example of something I did in the classroom. So we do welcome those kind of proposals for a Teaching Conference, but they might not end up in the live session quite as much as some other things.
For D, one of the feedback elements this year was a recommendation to have some sort of speed networking type. So there's a recognition that part of the added value of attending this conference is to meet others and maybe form alliances and do research collaborations across institutions. And that's quite difficult to do in this kind of space relative to a more traditional research space. So one proposal was, why don't we have much shorter sessions where the idea is you meet one-to-one based on common interests? So that kind of thing is a direction we're considering for D. It could broaden, there's an opportunity cost, right? But maybe good, because you can have 3 of those for every one paper and get more people meeting each other. So yeah.
Okay,
So
great.
for-
There's sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that if it's something like that, that seems like that would possibly fit in the poster session. So if you could make that into a poster, then you could submit that to C-Tree for a poster. And there was a really robust movement through the poster area during the last C-Tree, and lots of conversations. So it seems like that could possibly fit in what they're asking about, what Susan's asking about.
All right, thanks. So there's 2 questions from Cloda in the chat. They've been answered, but if anyone wants to add anything. So the 2 questions was, is there any blind reviewing, and is there any funding? So I think Simon has answered one and Tisha the other, but I don't know if anyone wants to add anything about this. So funding and blind reviewing.
I think, can I just explain my question? So the blind one, I mean, for teaching conference, I think we do what Dimitra said she did in D. So the reviewers look at them blind, and then we reveal who we've selected and shortlisted to check for all the, so I think we're all sort of on the same page that we don't want one person having too many papers and that we have diversity. But that was partly because as reviewers, we were worried that we might have close colleagues and be biased in some way selecting people. So we might be overly cautious. On the conference fee thing, I think it's, it can be a big issue for people in smaller universities. Even in a big university, I don't have money to go to America twice in a year, so I couldn't go to C-Tree and SEA, for example. So I do think, it's not on us, but I think organizations like the AEA and the Royal Economic Society, who do provide funds to PhD students for other types of conferences, and the EEA, Antonio, seeing as how you're here, whether we can think about for people who don't get grants in the same way as researchers, there might be a way to get some funding together for people in this area.
Okay, great. So now I think everything in the chat has been answered, I think, unless I missed something. So anyone else, if you want, just open the mics. We have at least something like almost 10 minutes, and then before we go to the breakout rooms. So if anyone who wants to open their mic, open them and ask, including panelists if you want.
Can I ask a question to the panelists? So Dimitra talked about the link between D and the IRE special issue, obviously. And I think in the past, the ASSA education sessions have at least once, maybe more times, been associated with the JE special session as well. Is there any other sort of ways that you link up from the conference to publications, for anyone who wants to answer that?
So I think in the past there have been some opportunities with that for C-Tree and for the ASSA. For the ASSA sessions that the committee organizes, we have one P&P session, and that alternates. Sometimes we assign it to a person to organize and they invite papers, and then other times we have an open call. So I think about every 3rd year or so, we'll have an open call for that. And then that would go into the P&P. For C-Tree, it really is, if there's a really negotiation beforehand with the journal editors, and I am no longer associated with the Journal for EconEd and have stepped down from Southern, so I don't participate in that. My understanding though is that there's been a backlog at JE, So I would think there might be like a reduction in that happening, but I'm not sure.
Any other questions? No? So it seems everything has been very